So we are back for another episode of GIS 101, and this webinar series is presenting a non-technical overview of topics within GIS, created as a tool for NSGIC members and others to use with the many people we deal with who could benefit from learning more about key GIS topics. And today we have Jamie Chesser, who is going to be presenting on geo-enabled elections. This is a really exciting topic. It's not only an area of GIS that NSGIC is focused on and our members are interested in, but it's also a major project of the organization and our many partners. So this is going to be a great overview, I think, of the concept of geo-enabled elections, as well as a little bit about the project itself from the project manager. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Jamie.
Thank you, Molly, and thank you all for being here today and allowing me some time to speak about the concept of geo-enabled elections. I thought I would speak for about 15 minutes and then leave some good time at the end for questions. And the focus today will be to answer some questions and put forth a call to action. So let's get started. So what are geo-enabled elections? Let's start at the beginning. To answer this question, we must first break down the term. And let's start with elections. Elections are complicated. Elections are political. Elections are interesting. There are so many different facets. And the rules are extremely specific, most found in state statute. And we're seeing now that some of the rules are changing due to COVID-19, both through the legislatures and executive order by governors. And each state is very different. Some states have a statewide voter registration system that's top down. Others have their voter registration systems at the county or bottom up. And perhaps most importantly to the GIS community, elections are geographic. As the Kentucky State Election Director said at the Elections Geo Summit held in August of 2019, maps are the foundation of our democracy. Where you sleep and live determines which races you vote in and what is on your ballot. Voters care about geography for this very reason. Candidates also care about geography as they must live in the district they seek to represent. Well, in most places anyway. Where you get your mail may also become important in the coming months as we see the idea of vote by mail become a popular topic of discussion on the national stage, as it's already been in states like Colorado, Oregon, and Washington, where it's purely vote by mail. Let me give you a little background about HAVA, or the Help America Vote Act that was passed in 2002. It required states to establish and maintain a state elections address database. Grants were even given that supported the creation of the address list approach to manage the assignment of voters to precincts. As you might imagine, the lists were really difficult to build and maintain. And also, the data is always changing, new developments, annexations, and so on. The data is in constant need of care and feeding, which is kind of a nearly impossible task to take on. And yet, so many states and counties still continue to use this approach, this address list approach. Lists and spreadsheets? The process also makes it impossible for the individual updating the table to visualize the new address point with any other election data like precincts. So why use lists when you have such a robust visualization tool like a GIS? So enter GIS, or Geographic Information Systems, or the geo-enabled part of the term geo-enabled elections. It is the opinion of many that right now, thousands of voters in this country are assigned to the wrong precinct. In fact, Kim Brace, president of Election Data Services, he's also an advisor to the Geo-Enabled Elections project at NSGIC, will go as far as to say that 12% or more of voters are assigned to the wrong precinct. And this is because lists of addresses are imprecise. Geographic Information Systems, or GIS, can help this situation. It's not a new technology. It's been around since the 1970s, and it really can be best described as a framework for gathering, managing, and analyzing data. So when we put GIS and elections together, you get geo-enabled elections. We know election geography is inherently spatial. We know geography matters for voting. And we can cite the 2017 Virginia state legislative race as evidence of this. And let me go into a little bit of detail about this in case you didn't hear about this particular race in 2017. This race was declared a tie, and the winner's name was picked out of a bowl. Yes, I said picked out of a bowl. The race was particularly important because it affected the balance of power in the Virginia House of Delegates. Had the Democrat in the race won, the House would have been split 50-50 between Democrats and Republicans. But the winner of the lottery, or picking out of the bowl, was a Republican, and thus Republicans narrowly held on to power in the House of Delegates. There was analysis done later that showed that election officials erred by placing more than 24 voters in the wrong legislative district using address lists. This was enough to sway this very close race. A geographic information system, or a GIS, allows you to visualize the election data that until more recently was stored, edited, and updated and viewed in a tabular format. That's changing. Things are changing. How do you know you have the right address in the right precinct when you cannot see or visualize the precinct polygon and the address point together, overlaid together? How do you know your data has integrity, that the correct address is in the correct precinct boundary? And again, the data is changing frequently in some places. New construction development is on the rise in most major cities. The process of accurately updating all of these tables is time-consuming and, quite honestly, just really tough. It isn't impossible to work with address lists, but it is really hard. So why geo-enabled elections? Well, quite simply, the reason is to get it right. Getting the right ballot to the right voter is reason number one. Every voter in this country should feel confidence that their vote matters and counts. This is truly the overarching goal for this work, but there are other reasons for geo-enabled elections. Geo-enabled elections bring data visualization and spatial analysis. Visualizing, analyzing, creating, and updating spatial data are far easier and quicker using a GIS. For example, with GIS layers for voter residences and precinct boundaries in place, checking or updating precincts for a county can take just seconds of computing time. Geo-enabled elections provide greater transparency to everyone, even the voter. They provide credibility and accuracy in your processes. You can cross-reference your address locations with important boundaries, residential parcels, roads, and addressing, even aerial photography and other data layers. Think the idea of the spatial data audit, ensuring that voter residence is in the right precinct and getting the right ballot. Another reason for the advancement of geo-enabled elections is it provides an opportunity to the GIS community to advocate for GIS and also geographic information officers and their equivalents. We believe that the involvement of the GIO and their equivalents is essential in the integration and implementation of GIS in elections because this is a spatial challenge and they know GIS technology, processes, and projects best in their states. The GIO can help to build capacity and provide resources for states to do this work into the future. And they also have their hands in all their states' geospatial cooking pots and have the perspective needed to determine parallel efforts and synergistic projects like Geo-Enabled Elections, the National Address Database, and Next Generation 911. Lastly, relationships are extremely important. Until recently, few GIOs and equivalents and state election directors were connected. They were in their respective silos. For geo-enabled elections to work, there must be connections and relationships between the GIO and their equivalents, state election directors, local GIS professionals, and local election officials, so they can work together to advance the work. Geo-enabled elections is a great opportunity to advance our state GIS capabilities and enhance, grow, and cultivate relationships at all levels of government, along with the private and public sector. It is an opportunity for all involved to expand their networks, enhance their perspectives, and truly work with groups beyond their circle. As the National Address Database, or the NAD, gains momentum and renewed attention within the NSGIC community and partner circles, it is interesting to watch how elections has become a use case for the NAD and how our new state election director connections can play an influential role in its advancement. Again, these relationships are extremely important. So why now? And I guess I would answer this question with another question. If not now, when? I believe we've reached a tipping point. We are seeing election errors more prevalently, and they are making headline news. Let me make mention of a couple additional cases that drew newsworthy attention. In 2010, Representative Craig Frank, a Republican in Utah, was reelected to the State House, a post he had held since 2003, only to find out that he didn't actually live in the district he was elected to represent. Frank had relocated to a new home in 2009, which he believed to be in the same district based on the state maps he had consulted. But there was a discrepancy between the state and county maps that had occurred after the 2000 redistricting process. And according to the county lines, he no longer lived in the same district. He had to vacate the seat when the discrepancy was found. Another example, in 2019, a Greenville, North Carolina City Council candidate, John Landron, learned at the polling booth that he did not live in the district he was running to represent. So he too, his candidacy was declared invalid. And these are just the cases that we know about. At the 2019 NSGIC annual conference in Duluth, Minnesota, Tammy Patrick, who's a senior advisor of elections at the Democracy Fund, likened errors in your voter registration database and election management system to the gnarly stuff you find under a log in the forest. She said, "What's hiding under your log? When do you want to find out what's underneath it?" We must do this work. We need complete GIS adoption and implementation in elections in every state to ensure the right ballot gets to the right voter. And just around the corner is redistricting. Redistricting is a legally required process that occurs every 10 years in which districts for the United States House and Senate and state legislatures are redrawn. It takes place after the census. Redistricting was the tipping point for election folks embracing geo-enabled elections in Utah nearly a decade ago. The work to update their address lists, particularly in years when redistricting occurred, became completely overwhelming to them. In Utah, the election folks contacted the GIS folks, kind of hands in the air, giving up, requesting a process and a system change. Again, this type of change is obviously a lot of work to go from an address list to geo-enabled elections. That is no doubt why so few states have fully implemented geo-enabled election systems and processes. But in the long run, the election processes and systems will be more efficient. They'll be more effective, accurate, and transparent. There will be less duplication and more sharing. Geo-enabled elections is the answer. We need to get it right. So how do we implement geo-enabled elections? Well, I would say bring together some folks that are passionate about GIS technology and geography and elections. And that's exactly what NSGIC has done in establishing the Geo-Enabled Elections Project, which is the vehicle to move this concept forward. And you can learn more about the concept and the Geo-Enabled Elections Project at elections.nsgic.org. The integration of GIS is essential to the evolution of our election data management system, and the GIO and the election director relationship is imperative to this evolution. I present this call to action to you. Join the movement, because GIS and elections is here to stay. I thank you for the time today, and that wraps up the presentation. I welcome your questions, and again, to learn more about the project and the concept, feel free to visit elections.nsgic.org. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jamie. That was great. I have a question for you. It's around sources election directors have, and can you see at the state level and then at the county level, in those election offices, do they have GIS resources at their disposal, both in terms of software and then as staff?
Great question. Thank you, Molly. At the end of, the beginning of 2019, as part of the Geo-Enabled Elections project, we pushed out a report that was based on interviews with state election directors around the country. And in that report, we were able to identify that 5 out of 6 election directors at the state level stated that they were familiar with GIS and they had access to a GIS expert. However, fewer than 1 in 3 could say with confidence that their voter registration system could support GIS data. And when looking or digging a little bit more, when they were asked to assess their state's degree of progress with geo-enabled elections, there was an average of 4 out of 10 that said that they were, anywhere near geo-enabled elections. Number of 10 represented full GIS integration. So to answer your question, at the state level, some state election offices do have GIS analysts, spatial analysts, data management folks on staff. It is rare, but they do have access to GIS professionals, some within the state government. And I'll give the example of Minnesota. In the state of Minnesota, within elections, the state election director has a GIS analyst on staff, and that's a nice situation, a lucky situation. The state election director also has access to the GIO office now that that relationship has been built. In other states, for example, let me give the example of Kentucky. Until recently, there was no GIS person within the state election office. And through being a part of this project, they're putting together and we're able to solidify a GIS person, staff person that would split their time between like the legislative resources group and the election office. And then in addition, being a part of the project, we're able to make some connections to the GIO office in the state of Kentucky. So it really depends. Every state is different. At the county level, it's more magnified, if you will. For most of the time at the county level, it really depends whether or not they have GIS resources at their disposal, depends on the size of the county, the financial resources of the county. The smaller counties, rural counties, typically will have less capacity in that area. And I might make mention as an example of Shasta County, California, who they don't necessarily have a GIS designated person at the elections office at the county, but they dabble in GIS as clerks and recorders there. And then they also have access to GIS personnel at the county level, not particularly, attached to elections. So long story short, it depends, but we're seeing some movement moving towards GIS being important to election offices.
This is Bridget. I have a question for you, Jamie. I know that some states use top-down voter registration systems and some use bottom-up. What is the breakdown of that within the United States, and do some of them have a mix of both?
Good question, Bridget. This really, that question and whether a state has a top-down voter registration system or a bottom-up really impacts geo-enabled elections, in that when you have a top-down system, you're honestly doing geo-enabled elections and getting your data in a good state one time, as opposed to those in states that are bottom up, where you would have to implement geo-enabled elections at every instance of that voter registration system in every county. So that's, kind of just to expand upon what top down and bottom up means. But we're lucky to have the Election Assistance Commission put together a really nice article on your question, Bridget. And 38 states have voter registration databases that function in a top-down manner. Again, meaning that the state has a single platform that collects and stores all that voter registration information from the jurisdictions. So it's at the state. 9 states have a hybrid system. And then 6 states report having a bottom-up voter registration system, where the local election offices transmit information retained at the local level and compile it at regular intervals to form the statewide system. So it's very mixed, and it definitely matters. It matters to have that information as we're discussing geo-enabled elections with states and counties. Good question.
So do you suggest one over the other?
I will say I don't think I can suggest that.
Okay.
I think it's the state that determines, how they're going to do it. Mm-hmm. And then we as a project can provide guidance to how to make it work for all of the types of scenarios.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks, Jamie, for a really great presentation. It's Harpinder here. I had a question. What is the connection between election security and ensuring voters get the correct ballot?
Awesome question. And this actually came up at the Elections Geo Summit that was held in August of 2019, so last year. There is a connection between election security and geo-enabled elections, and I think there's a growing number and audience of people who are beginning to see it. At the Elections Geo Summit last August, the keynote speaker for the summit was Megan Wolf, and she's a Wisconsin State Election Director. And during the summit, she said this, and it's, I think, a really important thing to bring up here. She said, these days, if someone gets the wrong ballot, they're likely to think the election has been hacked. So to me, that, kind of throws getting it wrong all into one bucket. Whether it truly is meddling in the election, or if it's something as simple as a geospatial error or an address list error and someone gets the wrong ballot. As the voter, it's the same result to you. Your vote has not been counted, and you, didn't have that opportunity. And so you could think a variety of things, but you may think that the election has been hacked. So unfortunately, there's no gray area anymore. Election errors are seen in a very black and white way, meddling or no meddling. So the way, what geo-enabled elections can do to help situations like that is mitigate errors, so create fewer election errors, which will inevitably improve a voter's confidence in the election and our democracy.
Jamie, thank you so much. I don't have any other questions. Do folks, any parting questions, parting thoughts? This has been really educational, and even as the project and body of knowledge are evolving, I think we continue to learn from one another here. So thank you.
You're welcome.
It's been really informative. Thank you so much, Jamie.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah.